Page 252. One morning, 3 years after I'd moved to New York, I was getting ready for class and listening to the radio. The announcer reported a terrible traffic jam on the New Jersey Turnpike. A van had broken down, spilling clothes and furniture all over the road and creating a big backup. The police were trying to clear the highway, but a dog had jumped out of the van and was running up and down the turnpike as a couple of officers chased after him. The announcer got a lot of mileage out of the story, going on about the rubes with their clunker of a vehicle and yapping dog who were making thousands of New York commuters late for work. That night, the psychologist told me I had a phone call. Genetikins! It was Mom. Guess what? She asked in a voice brimming with excitement. Your daddy and I have moved to New York. The first thing I thought about was the van that had broken down on the turnpike that morning. When I asked Mom about it, she admitted that yes, she and Dad had a teensy bit of technical difficulty with the van. It had popped a belt on some big crowded highway, and Tinkle, who was sick and tired of being cooped up, you know how that goes, had gotten loose. The police had shown up, and Dad got into an argument with them, and they threatened to arrest him, and gosh, it was quite the drama. How did you know? She asked. It was on the radio. On the radio? Mom asked. She couldn't believe it. With everything going on in the world these days, an old man popping a belt is news? But there was genuine glee in her voice. We only just got here, and we're already famous. After talking to Mom, I looked around my room. It was the maid's room off the kitchen, and it was tiny, with one narrow window and a bathroom that doubled as a closet. But it was mine. I had a room now, and I had a life, too, and there was no place in either one for Mom and Dad. Still, the next day I went up to Lori's apartment to see them. Everyone was there. Mom and Dad hugged me. Dad pulled a pint of whiskey out of a paper bag while Mom described their various adventures on the trip. They had gone sightseeing earlier that day and taken their first ride on the subway, which Dad called a goddamn hole in the ground. Mom said the Art Deco murals at Rockefeller Center were disappointing, not nearly as good as some of her own paintings. None of us kids was doing much to help carry the conversation. So what's the plan? Brian finally asked. You're moving here? We have moved, Mom said. For good? I asked. That's right, Dad said. Why? I asked. The question came out sharply. Dad looked puzzled, as if the answer should have been obvious. So we could be a family again. He raised his pint. To the family, he said. Mom and Dad found a room in a boarding house a few blocks from Lori's apartment. The steely-haired landlady helped them move in, and a couple of months later, when they fell behind on their rent, she put their belongings on the street and padlocked their room. Mom and Dad moved into a 6-story flop house in a more dilapidated neighborhood. They lasted there a few months, but when Dad set their room on fire by falling asleep with a burning cigarette in his hand, they got kicked out. Brian believed that Mom and Dad needed to be forced to be self-sufficient, or they'd be dependent on us forever, so he refused to take them in. But Lori had moved out of the South Bronx and into an apartment in the same building as Brian, and she let them come stay with her and Maureen. It would be for just a week or two, Mom and Dad assured her, a month at most, while they got a kitty together and looked for a new place. 1 month at Lori's became 2 months, and then 3 and 4. Each time I visited, the apartment was more jam-packed. Mom hung paintings on the walls and stacked street vines in the living room and put colored bottles in the windows for that stained glass effect. The stacks reached the ceiling, and then the living room filled up, and Mom's collectibles and found art overflowed into the kitchen. But it was Dad who was really getting to Lori. While he hadn't found steady work, he always had mysterious ways of hustling up pocket money, and he'd come home at night drunk and gunning for an argument. Brian saw that Lori was on the verge of snapping, so he invited Dad to come live with him. He put a lock on the booze cabinet, but Dad had been there under a week when Brian came home and found that Dad had used a screwdriver to take the door off its hinges and then guzzled down every single bottle. Brian didn't lose his temper. He told Dad he had made a mistake by leaving liquor in the apartment. He said he'd allow Dad to stay, but Dad had to follow some rules. The first being that he had to stop drinking as long as he was there. You're the king of your own castle, and that's the way it should be, Dad replied. But it'll be a chilly day in hell before I bow to my own son. He and Mom still had the white van they'd driven up from West Virginia, and he started sleeping in that. Lori, meanwhile, had given Mom a deadline to clean out the apartment. But the deadline came and went, and so did a second and a third. Also, Dad was always dropping by to visit Mom, but then they got into such screeching arguments that the neighbors banged on the walls. Dad started fighting with them, too. I can't take it anymore, Lori told me one day. Maybe you're just going to have to kick Mom out, I said. But she's my mother. It doesn't matter. She's driving you crazy. Lori finally agreed. It almost killed her to tell Mom she would have to leave, and she offered to do whatever it took to help her get reestablished. But Mom insisted she'd be fine. Lori's doing the right thing, she said to me. Sometimes you need a little crisis to get your adrenaline flowing and help you realize your potential. Mom and Tinkle moved into the van with Dad. They lived there for a few months, but one day they left it in a no parking zone and it was towed. Because the van was unregistered, they couldn't get it back. That night, they slept on a park bench. They were homeless. Mom and Dad called regularly from payphones to check up on us, and once or twice a month we'd all get together at Lori's. It's not such a bad life, Mom told us after they'd been homeless for a couple of months. Don't you worry a lick about us, Dad added. We've always been able to fend for ourselves. Mom explained that they'd been busy learning the ropes. They'd visited the various soup kitchens, sampling the cuisines, and had their favorites. They knew which churches passed out sandwiches and when. They'd found the public libraries with good bathrooms where you could wash thoroughly. We wash as far down as possible and as far up as possible, but we don't wash possible, was how Mom put it, and brush your teeth and shave. They fished newspapers from the trash cans and looked up free events. They went to plays and operas and concerts in the parks, listened to string quartets and piano recitals in office building lobbies, attended movie screenings and visited museums. When they first became homeless, it was early summer and they slept on park benches or in the bushes that lined park paths. Sometimes a cop would wake them up and tell them to move, but they'd just find some other place to sleep. During the day, they'd stash their bedrolls in the underbrush. You can't just live like this, I said. Why not? Mom said. Being homeless is an adventure. As fall came and the days shortened and the weather cooled, Mom and Dad began spending more time in the libraries, which were warm and comfortable, and some of which remained open well into the evening. Mom was working her way through Balzac. Dad had become interested in chaos theory and was reading Los Alamos Science and the Journal of Statistical Physics. He said it had already helped his pool game. What are you going to do when winter comes? I asked Mom. She smiled. Winter is one of my favorite seasons, she said. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to do whatever I could to take care of Mom and Dad, and part of me just wanted to wash my hands of them. The cold came early that year, and every time I left the psychologist's apartment, I found myself looking into the faces of the homeless people I passed on the street, wondering each time if one of them would turn out to be Mom or Dad. I usually gave homeless people whatever spare change I could, but I couldn't help feeling like I was trying to ease my conscience about Mom and Dad wandering the streets while I had a steady job and a warm room to come home to. One day I was walking down Broadway with another student named Carol when I gave some change to a young homeless guy. You shouldn't do that, Carol said. Why? It only encourages them. They're all scam artists. What do you know? I wanted to ask. I felt like telling Carol that my parents were out there too, that she had no idea what it was like to be down on your luck, with nowhere to go and nothing to eat. But that would have meant explaining who I really was, and I wasn't about to do that. So, at the next corner, I went my way without saying a thing. I knew I should have stood up for Mom and Dad. I'd been pretty scrappy as a kid, and our family had always fought for one another. But back then, we'd had no choice. The truth was, I was tired of taking on people who ridiculed us for the way we lived. I just didn't have it in me to argue Mom and Dad's case to the world. That was why I didn't own up to my parents in front of Professor Fuchs. She was one of my favorite teachers, a tiny, dark, passionate woman with circles under her eyes who taught political science. One day, Professor Fuchs asked if homelessness was the result of drug abuse and misguided entitlement programs, as the conservatives claimed, or did it occur, as the liberals argued, because of cuts in social service programs and the failure to create economic opportunity for the poor. Professor Fuchs called on me. I hesitated. Sometimes I think it's neither. Can you explain yourself? I think that maybe sometimes people just get the lives that they want. Are you saying homeless people want to live on the streets? Professor Fuchs asked. Are you saying they don't want warm beds and roofs over their heads? Not exactly, I said. I was fumbling for words. They do, but if some of them are willing to work hard and make compromises, they might not have ideal lives, but they could make ends meet. Professor Fuchs walked around from behind the lectern. What do you know about the lives of the underprivileged? She asked. She was practically trembling with agitation. What do you know about the hardships and obstacles that the underclass faces? The other students were staring at me. You have a point, I said. That surprises me about Jeanette. I wish she would have said, oh, I know a lot. Let me tell you a few things that I know. But I suppose she might not feel like she's in a situation where she can. That January, it got so cold you could see chunks of ice the size of cars floating down the Hudson River. On those midwinter nights, the homeless shelters filled up quickly. Mom and Dad hated the shelters. Human cesspools, Dad called them. Goddamn vermin pits. Mom and Dad preferred to sleep on the pews of the churches that opened their doors to the homeless. But on some nights, every pew in every church was taken. On those nights, Dad would end up in a shelter while Mom would show up at Lori's, tinkle in tow. At times like that, her cheerful facade would crack, and she'd start crying and confess to Lori that life in the streets could be hard, just really hard. For a while, I considered dropping out of Barnard to help. It felt unbearably selfish, just downright wrong, to be indulging myself with an education in the liberal arts at a fancy private college while Mom and Dad were on the streets. But Lori convinced me that dropping out was a lame-brained idea. It wouldn't do any good, she said. And besides, dropping out would break Dad's heart. He was immensely proud that he had a daughter in college, and an Ivy League college at that. Every time he met someone new, he managed to work it into the first few minutes of conversation. Mom and Dad, Brian pointed out, had options. They could move back to West Virginia or Phoenix. Mom could work, and she was not destitute. She had her collection of antique Indian jewelry, which she kept in a self-storage locker. There was that 2-carat diamond ring that Brian and I had found under the rotten lumber back in Welch. She wore it even when sleeping on the street. She still owned property in Phoenix, and she had the land in Texas, the source of her oil lease royalties. Brian was right. Mom did have options. I met her at a coffee shop to discuss them. First off, I suggested that she might think of finding an arrangement like mine, a room in someone's nice apartment in exchange for taking care of children or the elderly. I've spent my life taking care of other people, Mom said. Now it's time to take care of me. I'm not sure Mom ever really took care of other people, but okay, Mom. But you're not taking care of you. Do we have to have this conversation? Mom asked. I've seen some good movies lately. Can't we talk about the movies? I suggested to Mom that she sell her Indian jewelry. She wouldn't consider it. She loved that jewelry. Besides, they were heirlooms and had sentimental value. I mentioned the land in Texas. That land's been in the family for generations, Mom said, and it's staying in the family. You never sell land like that. I asked about the property in Phoenix. I'm saving that for a rainy day. Mom, it's pouring. This is just a drizzle, she said. Monsoons could be ahead. She sipped her tea. Things usually work out in the end. What if they don't? That just means you haven't come to the end yet. She looked across the table and smiled at me with the smile you give people when you know you have the answers to all their questions. And so we talked about the movies.